They lined up every morning, laughing, bargaining, and pointing at the fish she sold. To them, she was just the black woman at the edge of the market, tolerated but never respected. They spat insults behind her back, mocked her skin, and yet still filled their baskets with what she offered. They never asked where her catch came from, never cared to know her struggle. But if only they knew what she wrapped so carefully in those banana leaves and called fish. The truth was darker than the river itself, and it carried the weight of centuries of pain. In the heart of a bustling colonial town, where the streets were lined with whitewashed houses and the smell of fried food lingered in the air, there stood the marketplace. It was the heartbeat of the town, a place where gossip traveled faster than the wind and where the divisions between people were drawn as sharply as the lines on a map. At the far corner of the market, near the muddy entrance, where rainwater collected, sat a woman everyone knew but few respected. Her name was Adana. Adana was dark-skinned, her hands rough from years of labor, her eyes heavy with the weight of battles she never chose. She lived at the edge of town, in a shack too fragile to withstand storms, yet strong enough to carry her secrets. Every morning before the sun rose, she walked to the river, returning with bundles she wrapped in banana leaves. The townspeople, eager for fresh fish, crowded around her. They bought from her not because they liked her, but because her goods were cheap, cheaper than anyone else's. Behind their coins and fake smiles, however, lay something venomous. They whispered cruel words when she turned her back. Some refused to let her touch their hands, dropping their payment on the ground instead. Others mocked her accent, her hair, or the fact that she dared to exist in a town where her presence was tolerated only out of necessity. Yet they kept eating. They kept buying. And with every coin that clinked into her basket, they unknowingly fueled the very thing that would one day haunt them. For Adana carried with her more than fish. She had a memory, a pain, and a choice that would make the entire town shiver once the truth came to light. Adana's stall became a paradox in the marketplace. Every morning people came to her not out of kindness but out of need. They wanted her fish because it was cheap and because she always had more than anyone else. Yet they despised her existence. They scowled at her skin, mocked her presence, and whispered ugly jokes just loud enough for her to hear. She carried these insults quietly, her face as unreadable as the river that fed her trade. To the townspeople, she was invisible until they needed her. Mothers who cursed her in the morning would still cook her goods for their children by night. Men who spat near her feet still sent their wives to buy from her. And though they tried to convince themselves that she was beneath them, their survival depended on the very hands they scorned. But something about Adana unsettled them. She never argued back. She never begged for mercy, never raised her voice. Instead, she worked in silence, her eyes always lingering on the river longer than anyone thought necessary. And when she wrapped the day's catch in banana leaves, there was a precision to it, almost ceremonial. The more they mocked, the quieter she became. And in that silence, unease began to grow. Children were told not to linger near her shack. Some whispered that she spoke to the river at night, that strange lights flickered around her home when the moon was high. A few even claimed they had seen her carrying bundles not from the river but from the road that led deep into the forest, where shadows seemed to cling longer than daylight. Yet no one dared confront her. After all, they needed her fish. Hunger spoke louder than suspicion, and so they turned away from their unease, convincing themselves that she was just another poor woman trying to survive. But behind Adana's quiet demeanor was a heart carved by centuries of wounds. She remembered the stories her grandmother told her, of chains, of lashes, of names spat like curses. She remembered her own childhood, when the same townspeople who now bought from her had once pushed her into the dirt, refusing to let her play with their children. Every insult they thought she had forgotten still lived in her chest, smoldering like embers waiting for air. Every coin they placed in her hands felt like a payment for something far greater than fish. For Adana was not selling them nourishment, she was selling them their own arrogance, wrapped neatly, day after day. And though the town did not yet know it, the price of their ignorance was climbing higher with each passing sunrise. The truth was buried beneath the leaves she folded so carefully. And when it finally surfaced, when hunger and cruelty collided with what she carried in her baskets, the marketplace itself would never be the same. The breaking point came on a sweltering afternoon when the river ran strangely still, as if the current itself had frozen in anticipation. That day a boy from the town disappeared. He had been seen last walking along the forest's edge, near the path that wound close to Adana's shack. Whispers spread like wildfire. Mothers clutched their children closer. Men began to glance toward her stall with suspicion sharp enough to cut. Still, when the market opened, they bought her fish. Hunger had no patience for fear. But one woman, driven by unease, unwrapped her purchase before leaving the marketplace. And there, beneath the folds of banana leaves, lay not the shimmer of scales, but something pale, something unmistakably human. Fingers, small and lifeless, tucked neatly as though part of the day's catch. The marketplace erupted. Screams tore through the air. Baskets crashed to the ground and coins scattered and rolled into the mud. People dropped their bundles, the leaves unraveling to reveal pieces that no one could mistake. What they had been roasting, frying, feeding to their children all along was not fish, it was flesh. Flesh that did not come from the river or the mob surged toward Adana, their faces twisted with rage, horror, and the kind of fear that had once lived only in her. They shouted accusations, curses, demands for her blood. But Adana did not run. She stood as if rooted to the earth itself, her eyes locked on theirs with a fire that silenced even the loudest cry. Her voice, steady and low, cut through the chaos. Though her words were few, they carried centuries of weight. She told them they had fed on her pain, her humiliation, her stolen dignity. Every bite a mirror of what they had done to her people for generations. The flesh they consumed was not just human, it was history served back to them, piece by piece, until the truth could no longer be ignored. And as the crowd recoiled in terror, clutching their stomachs and retching into the dirt, Adana remained still. For at last, they had tasted what they had forced her to swallow her entire life. The marketplace never returned to what it once was. The very ground where Adana's stall had stood seemed cursed, shunned by even the boldest traders. The smell, a fish no longer carried innocence through the streets. Instead, it reminded them of their own blind cruelty, their own complacency. Families who had once feasted together now whispered at their tables, too ashamed to admit what they had consumed. The town tried to erase her name, to bury her story beneath silence, but silence could not cover the truth. Mothers warned their children never to mock the poor, never to spit cruel words at those who sold at the edges of the market. Men who once threw coins at her feet now found themselves unable to sleep, haunted by the memory of pale flesh wrapped where fish should have been. Some claimed Adana vanished into the river that night, walking calmly into its dark embrace as if the water had always been waiting for her. Others swore they saw her shack burning, flames devouring it as she stood unmoving, her silhouette tall against the fire. Nobody was ever found. She became both a ghost and a lesson, an echo that lingered in every corner of the town. But the deeper scar was not what she sold. It was what she revealed, the hypocrisy of a community that mocked, dehumanized, and exploited her, yet depended on her for their survival. They had consumed more than flesh. They had consumed their own reflection. And when confronted with that truth, there was no cleansing it away. Her act was not one of madness, but of testimony. A final statement that cruelty never goes unnoticed, that centuries of degradation do not fade quietly. She forced them to taste what they had forced her to endure, and in doing so, she turned their tables of abundance into shrines of horror. And so the question remains, echoing long after her name has faded. How many more Adanas must be pushed to the edge before the world learns that every insult, every act of racism, carries a cost?